Hello, purely Arsenal FP listeners. Quick late night one for England. Obviously, clearly not late night here. Absolutely sweltering out here. Sun's out, guns out, all that stuff. Noni Madueke is, by all intents and purposes, an Arsenal player. So I thought I'd come on and discuss it for 5 to 10 minutes, maybe a little bit on the striker situation. And obviously, where do we start with this? So, my opinion on podcasts and on recent videos that I've posted, as you will well know, is I felt this was the summer to really focus on the attack. And I felt we had 3 needs in the attack, and I didn't necessarily expect us to get 3 players for those 3 needs, but I felt we had 3 needs. Centre forward being the priority one. Havertz just coming back from surgery, Gabriel Jesus out with an ACL tear, and fitness-wise has not really been relied upon over the course of the last few seasons. So it felt, and the fact that we don't really have a true goal scorer up there, felt that was priority number 1. Priority number 2 for me was a starting left winger. Now, I know we have 2 in Martinelli and Trossard, if you want to call them that. But I felt we've been looking for a starting winger for a while, and we have been, with the bids and looks at Nico Williams and Rafinha. You could even include Madueke and other wingers in that. And then the other one, if your starting left winger was not able to do this, was to get a backup right winger. Now, Noni Madueke, in terms of his history and positional history, looks really like the backup right winger. The problem Arsenal fans, I think, will have is many will have looked at it like me and see it as a priority in that way. And when you've been looking for a top attacker for so long, or multiple top attackers for so long, and you've not really signed a big money attacker since, well, you could argue winger wise since Nicolas Pepe. Striker wise, hard one to say, isn't it? Because you had Gabriel Jesus. Havertz was bought as an 8 to be used at times as a 9. I think not the opposite. Now he's a 9, which is used as times as an 8. So hard to say, but I felt the priority really was in those areas. So obviously there's been a huge uproar against Noni Madueke. But I do want to say from the bat, and I think that's terrible, by the way, all the sort of criticism, and criticising's fine, but in terms of abuse or sending messages to players on Instagram that aren't even at our club yet, and even if they were, it's just pathetic, isn't it? And no one condones that at all. So that's just online vitriol, and I've got no time for it at all, and no real Arsenal fan has. Support every player that comes to the club, of course, that's a given, and I will support Noni Madueke, and I do think he has some qualities. I think the issue, though, that Arsenal fans will have is we know we are quite limited in the way we move our money in terms of attacking players. So when you go and see a 52 million amount spent, you're immediately going to think that's not being spent on a backup player. And if it is a backup player, then we will go and spend unprecedented money this window on attackers, because basically, if you're saying Noni Madueke is a backup right winger, and that is what you're bringing him in as, then you're going to go and sign your starting left winger, and you're going to go and sign your centre forward. Therefore, if you evaluate that, plus all the other additional deals we do, it will be the biggest summer spend we've ever spent by some distance, getting close to 300 million. And it will be an unprecedented amount of money spent on an attack for us in one window, without a shadow of a doubt. So obviously, lots of Arsenal fans, with logic and objectively looking at it over the course of multiple windows, will look at that and think that's relatively unlikely. So they're going to look at Noni Madueke and think that is our winger signing. That is a right winger that he believes can play also on the left and start on the left possibly, even though there's not a lot of evidence to suggest he does that much. And I think that's where Arsenal fans will have a right to feel frustrated. And the Arsenal board and the Arsenal hierarchy will know that by doing this signing as your first attacker, the optics on it will cause a fair amount of anxiety and frustration amongst the Arsenal fan base. Now, that should never overkill into what some of the stuff we've been seeing with abuse and things like that, never. But the constructive criticism, the frustration, I can actually understand. I think the club has to take a little bit of responsibility there with that, because they don't care when they sign players. But Arsenal fans will look at this and look at the history of our signings and say, this is 52 million being spent quite possibly on a starting winger here. And we have to not assume that, but at least contemplate that thought process, because we haven't signed any other attacker yet. What do I think truly it means? I don't really know. I don't think you can evaluate this signing fully until the end of the transfer window, because like I said, if Noni Madueke is the third of 3 attackers, it's a fantastic signing. It really is, because then you're looking at it going, wow, we spent 52 million on a backup right winger. You know, if you look at some of the top clubs, do they have an established Premier League backup right winger that's got really good carrying ability, decent output, not great, but decent output, and has his best years in front of him and has played in the Premier League at, you know, top level, you know, helping Chelsea get into the top 4? That's a statement at that point, to sign someone to support Saka and help Saka that much. On the flip side, if Noni Madueke becomes your starting winger, or your winger purchase of this window, who you believe can challenge to be a starter on the left and will play a fair amount on the right, then I think a lot of fans will be underwhelmed by that. And I would be one of those fans. So it's a really hard transfer to judge at this point in the window. But I certainly have my scepticism on it. And some people saying, oh, just signing from Chelsea is just exhausting. I get you on that. You know, I do understand. When a team has signed half the world's players, you know, it would almost be wrong not to at least have a look there, wouldn't it? But I do see where Arsenal fans will just feel this general sort of fatigue and malaise of, oh, not Chelsea again. Do you know what I mean? But they're just like a conveyor belt, aren't they? They just churn them out and just sign players, a whole new squad every window. And but I can understand both sides of it there. So it's a difficult one. Look, I think he's got a lot of qualities. I think he's probably a better dribbler than Saka. But there's a lot of attributes. Obviously, Saka's far better, and he's an England international now. He's done pretty well for Chelsea. Some attitude concerns, I would say, and some off-the-ball work that I've seen that is a little bit of concerns, but Mikel Arteta obviously thinks he can work with that. Look, like I said, if he's a backup right winger, and we go and get a Gyökeres or a top centre-forward and a top player that can play on the left, and ideally maybe like an Eze play also in the pocket, then I will honestly be super impressed by the Madueke signing. I actually will look at it in a different light. But at the same time, if he's just one of 2 attackers, I'm going to come on here and I'm going to say our goal was to get 2 elite forwards in at minimum, and we didn't do that because Noni Madueke is not that at the moment. He's not that. And to believe he will be that, I don't think we're at a stage where we should be signing a player for that amount of money to be the next big thing at our winger position and solve some of the issues we've honestly been having for a couple of years from the left winger. There's a reason that Martinelli and Trossard are interchanging, and we're having this debate all the time about who should start. And the honest reason is neither of them have been good enough. They've been okay, but neither of them have been consistently good enough, like Saka has been, to a level where we believe that they can take us to winning something big. And that's just the crux of it, really, for me. 52 million. Apparently he's on a relatively low wage, 40 to 50 grand a week. Look, the fee's high. The fee is high. There's no doubt about it. They've obviously compared it to the Elanga and the Kudus fee. I think both of those players are arguably a little bit more proven. Elanga in terms of his versatility and also his output. Kudus, I think, is a better footballer, to be honest. I think Tottenham have got a good deal there. They've obviously had to pay probably a little bit more, maybe up front. I don't know, but it's very similar fees. 52 million, I think Elanga was 52. I think Kudus might have been 55 million. I don't think it was the fee. Now, you could argue that Elanga played in a very different system, a transitional system that wouldn't work for us necessarily. I can see that. Could also argue that Kudus also had some attitude problems. West Ham were kind of happy to get rid of him, and Kudus would have wanted to start. And if we are buying Madueke as a backup, that's why you wouldn't be able to get Kudus. Again, time will tell if that's the case. I'm not jumping for joy. At the same time, I support him. I have to say, one thing that a lot of you are probably going to go, what does that matter? I would be very curious to see what number he gets. Because if he gets any of the 2 big numbers, 10 and 14, which I have to say, I can't believe that he will, but there's obviously a possibility. They're open numbers. I think the writing's on the wall there, really. If he doesn't, you'd have to hope that the club looks at that and goes, we're still trying to get those players in. In terms of where it leaves us, in terms of the transfer window, there's still a long time left. But Gyökeres, or a centre-forward, top centre-forward, was the one that was really needed for me for the start of pre-season. You could push that to as late as July 19th when we travel to Singapore. So there's still time, not a lot of time. On that front, it sounds like there's a discrepancy of 5 to 10 million. Again, this is where there's going to be a frustration from the fans, because if that's true, they're going to ask themselves, well, why can we do a deal so quickly for what I believe is a very, very generous amount of money for Noni Madueke like that? We can do a deal like that with Chelsea, but we don't seem to be able to do it anywhere else. Every other deal just seems like we're dragging it out to the point where you're sticking your finger in your eye and swiveling it around and just going, what are we doing? To the point where there's just general fatigue by the time you do sign these players, like Zubimendi one, for example, who I think is a fantastic signing, but just drag it out. And what we were hoping was, and it may still be the case, is that Berto would be a little bit more quick and efficient with stuff. So there's a lot to take with this, and it could be anything from I honestly think it could be anything from like an 8 to 9 out of 10 signing, and anything to as low as feeling like a 4 or 5, and being really disappointed based on what else we do. The reason I would, again, I'll go back to it, the reason I would have some scepticism here is because in order to do, let's say, Gyökeres and Eze, which are the two biggest links elsewhere in the attack, you're really, even optimistically, talking about another 140 million on top of this signing plus all the other signings you've made. Now, if you add that all up, I've not got the calculator out, but you really are getting up to around 280 million, I believe. Now, that is unprecedented money for us. We've never spent more than, what, 210 million, I think, in a window, which was 2 years ago. I know, with inflation and things like that, and we definitely waited our time to spend on the attack. But if you go and get an Eze, or you go and get a Rodrigo, and you go and get a Gyökeres, or you get a Sesko, as a pair, Madueke will look like a really, really clever signing. Not necessarily a financially fantastic signing, because I do think it's excess. But I think we've been very, very generous with the amount we're giving to Chelsea here, and I don't think there was really anyone else in for Madueke, so it wasn't like we were in a bidding war. I also am a little frustrated that it is the first signing. I mentioned why. It's the third priority out of 3 for me, but the other reason is he's still at the Club World Cup. He can't come and do a medical yet, and even if he can, he's going to go on his holidays, because he has to be given 3 to 4 weeks. So it doesn't feel like a signing. Chelsea don't immediately need the finance. We've got a great relationship with them, whatever. It just felt like a deal that could wait for me, and you can go and move your other deals earlier. Again, very difficult to evaluate because we don't know what's going to happen. But I have my readying frustrations, if you like. But I'm also ready to be surprised. I would be very surprised, though, I have to say, if we go and do 2 more big attackers. And I think it's going to require a sale, which, again, will really frustrate someone. If we go and get the centre forward, and then we hear, well, in order to do a big left winger, you're going to have to sell Martinelli, so it won't happen otherwise. Everyone's going to go livid. And rightly, because they're going to go, you just spent 52 million on a backup right winger who's not good enough to start for us at left wing. Why didn't you go and get a starting left winger, or a possibility of starting left winger, that can maybe cover on the right? Remember, we do also have Ranieri. We don't know what's going to go on there, but he's cover at the right. He could be cover at the right. He's going to be better than he was last year, for sure, I think. So the argument that we were absolutely desperate to get cover at the right, I'm not so sure. I don't know what this says about Bukayo Saka's fitness. It may say that we want to be really, really careful with the player. He didn't come back anywhere near the level he was prior to his injury. And I think in that sense, very, very, very sensible. But again, if I'm evaluating the attack truly, there was 2 bigger priorities than this one. And you might say, what does it matter the order that we do it in? I'd refer you back to last summer for that. Because when we didn't get Sesko, who everyone said was the target, and you shouldn't compromise on your targets. Well, we've done that, haven't we, with Sesko and Williams, because neither's going to happen from the looks of things. So you should compromise on your targets, because otherwise you don't end up getting anyone. You get Sterling on loan, you spend the 70 million that you were trying to spend on Sesko on another left back and a midfielder. So again, timing, I think, is everything, especially in this window, because I think the attackers that we really want have the ability to start, and you want your starters in early. You just do, for me. All right, well, that's what I've got to say. Let me know your thoughts, comments. Noni Madueke is an Arsenal player. Well, yeah, I'm not down in the dumps about it, but I could be jumping for joy by the end of the window, or massively frustrated. And I think I've explained my reasons for that. At Purely Arsenal FP on Twitter. Subscribe here if you can, like, comment, no adverts, all free. I'm doing these a little bit more now because I'm trying to get my vitamin D in, you know what I mean? maybe I'll be back tomorrow. We need an announcement on the centre forward. We need one. Hopefully that announcement is we're not moving on to other targets and we're agreeing a deal on this target. Bring me Gyökeres, okay? Yeah. Up the Arsenal. Keep the faith.